with a fake scroll in her hands. Shigiri. Katsu. Anyone? The only answer she received was the stalwart silence of the trees, which was drowned out by the bear's growls as they grew even more haggard from the chase. Shigiri and Katsu, her teammates for the exam, left her die after they had purposely aggravated the bear with 2 kunai. Then they left her to stand there and become the target of its rage, hoping that someone else would come by. They hoped someone would see her, a young girl with red hair and glasses, and save her from the bear. Only for them to swoop down afterwards and steal their scroll, rewarding their heroism with knives in the back. So much for that famous hidden grass diplomacy she'd heard about. She told them it was a stupid plan. They were in the middle of a competition. People died during these things, and they were warned ahead of time what kind of place it was. No one would save her, and she had already been tired from the non-stop running to this point. The forest of death could give even the great forest of Kusa, where the enriched earth and sun-blotting canopy allowed the mushrooms and fungi to rival the height of buildings, a decent run in how savage it was. Sure, it had snakes and poisonous lizards. But at least it didn't have freaking tigers, or giant centipedes, or leeches that tried to suck you dry, or goddamn bears that wouldn't quit chasing her. Damn it, if she had known this would have happened she would have done it anyway. Orochimaru had laid the groundwork for getting her into the hidden grass village a year ago, leaving her to act as a spy and help him with whatever plan he had for the hidden leaf village this year. She knew the price of failure, and that her worth was only because she was still useful. It had been 2 years now since that day. The small village where she and her mother lived ended up being attacked while she was out in a nearby field. She sensed them coming, along with the almost palpable bloodlust and eagerness, and how some of them stood out by having more chakra than the others. It scared her. To have that malevolence, that revelry of the dark nature of mankind, touch her mind at such a young age without realizing what was happening left her terrified, clawing at her head to get it to go away. Then the screams from the village reached her ears as the blood began to soak the earth and flames ran wild. She ended up hiding, crying as the tears mixed with the ashes until it was all over the next morning. Her mother hadn't made it. No one else had. The path through the field to another village was long, leaving her cold and tired as her power seemed to flicker on and off. By the time she made it, she couldn't muster the energy to resist even as men threatened to take her and sell her into slavery. Nor when Orochimaru killed them and offered her a place to go since she had nowhere. It had been luck that she had made it to this point. But her luck refused to hold out any further. It only took a single moment, where the sweat stung her eyes and forced her to blink, for her to trip over an upraised root and end up sprawled with her back against a mighty tree. The impact stole her breath and forced it out of her throat, heated and raw. She was left staring down the eyes of the maddened bear, angered by the pair of kunai wedged in its back and worked up by the chase. It was going to kill her. Help. Her plea was near silent as the bear opened its mouth and revealed the stained fangs from a recent meal, matted with bits of meat and strings of saliva. She realized she was going to die. Bannzzzzai, screamed innumerable voices, a chorus that came from above. It drew both the bear and Karen's gaze, whereupon they witnessed a rain of blonde-haired, orange jumpsuit-wearing boys descending. The group piled on the bear, hanging off of its larger and looming figure as it swiped at them and shook desperately to remove them. Karen felt a hand grasping her shoulder and jumped. She looked to her right to see another one of the boys, reaching for her arm. What are? Come on. He threw her over his shoulder and sped off, foot glowing with the illumination of chakra as he darted from trunk to branch. He carried her some distance away from the bear, leaving her to watch as the last of his doppelgangers removed the kunai in the back of the bear, and then vanished in a puff of smoke. It was only after the bear, which seemingly glared in their direction for a moment, trotted off that she breathed freely, and then remembered that she was not in the safe comfort of her asshole teammates, but a complete stranger from a rival village. She was being taken hostage. "Let me go," she said, slamming the bottom of her fists and the scroll against the small of his back while flailing her legs. Release me this instant. Hey, don't struggle so much. The effort seemed at best to annoy him as he came to a stop and set her down against the crook of a tree limb. He pouted as he scratched his head. Geez, was that the thanks I get for helping out? Karen reached for a kunai and held it out defensively, clutching the false scroll to her chest with trembling fingers. She had to sell the impression that it was real. I won't let you have it. The blonde-hair boy held his hands up next to his head harmlessly. Hold on, I don't want your scroll. Besides, my team already has the Earth Scroll. The mention of a team set her mind to high alert. Was this an ambush spot? Where were they hiding? She couldn't take her eyes off of him, otherwise he'd disarm and capture her, but she could spread her mind's eye out and sense anyone hiding nearby. The range seemed to only improve when she was riled up, afraid. She could feel the chakra surrounding them within a larger range than before. There was no one besides him, a strange and warm chakra that reminded her of her mother's. You can put that thing down now, the boy said, tilting his head. I'm not going to hurt you. If you... She swallowed, trying to calm her heart as it hammered in her chest from the chase. If you don't want my scroll, then why did you save me? You called for help, right? She nodded. Well, Sasuke and I had played a round of Janken to decide who would go in what direction, and I lost. So I went this way and heard you screaming. When I saw that the bear was going to get you, I called up a bunch of shadow clones to drop down while I went down the side of the tree and around to where you were. He demonstrated by making a hand seal, and she felt his chakra split in half. It literally split in half as another one of him came into existence, virtually identical in terms of chakra amount and type. Had she not been in front of him, she would have no clue which was the real one. He dispersed the clone, the chakra immediately retuning to him. Anyway, you're okay now, Karen, she told him, naturally still wary of the situation. Why was he being so good-natured? Could he not see her headband was different than his? Oh, that's a pretty name, he said, grinning and pointing a thumb to himself. I'm Naruto. Naruto Uzumaki. Her head seemed to become cloudy and hazed at the mention. That name was, it was her clan's name. But that should have been impossible. Why? Karen stiffened when she felt two familiar chakra signatures approaching. Shurjeri and Katsu. Of course they'd pop up now, of all times. They'd no doubt try to jump him and, while she didn't know how the fight would go since he could clone himself, she didn't want him to lose. If they managed to beat him, they'd probably take him and his scroll as leverage against other teams to get what they wanted. She was fairly sure he was slow on the uptake, a good-hearted rube if anything, but, yeah, she couldn't let him get caught by those jerks. Even if they had better odds that way, she just wouldn't be responsible for that, especially if he was who he said he was. It wasn't like she even cared about passing the exams anyway. Leave. He blinked. Huh? Get out of here. She held her kunai up and stepped towards him. Go back to your team. Now? Okay. He did as he was told, jumping from the tree limb they were on to another in the distance. He looked back towards her a final time before departing for good, disappearing in a body flicker. She felt him heading in the opposite direction until he was outside her range. Karen breathed easier, even as the two older boys landed less than 10 seconds later. She wheeled around and faced them. Where were you two when that bear was attacking me? Sticking to the plan, Katsu said, unashamed. Worst case, we'd have gotten you out. Bullshit. She threw the fake scroll towards Shurjeri, who caught it without blinking. That bear was seconds away from tearing me apart, and you didn't do anything. You bastards left me to die. The plan worked, Shurjeri said. Or it would have if you managed to stall him for another few seconds. He didn't even have his scroll on him. She crossed her arms. And his team had the same one as ours. Did you even think about that when you came up with this plan? We still could have taken him as leverage. If you thought you could, then you cowards would have tried to get him when all those clones popped up. Don't blame me when I didn't even want to go through with this stupid plan in the first place. Karen jumped and skirted down the trunk of the tree. She didn't want to be around them any longer than she had to, and she got the feeling that it was mutual between them. Besides, she had other things on her mind. That boy said he was an Uzumaki, the same clan as hers. She wanted to know more about that. But first she had to get through this damn forest alive. 0-0-0. Karen's thoughts about the Uzumaki boy continued until the final day came. They failed the second portion of the exam because they didn't find a heaven scroll in time, but Karen didn't care. Why should she when they didn't care about her enough to refrain from using her as bait? Those two had already left, mentioning how they would let their jounin know she didn't play along. Karen decided to wait there until she saw Kabuto arriving at the entrance of the underground path back to the village. His own teammates had chosen to remain behind for preliminary matches in the arena, and would join once they were settled. She steeled herself and walked up alongside him, when there was no one in sight, and no cameras. "What is it?" he asked, short and to the point. "MMM." She struggled to ask him because, quite frankly, Kabuto scared her. He was Orochimaru's right hand for a reason. She'd watched him kill a man with no visible wounds, animate his body, and then sent him on a civilian killing spree to frame a group of shinobi without batting an eyelid once. "Do you have information on a boy who entered the exams, a Naruto Uzumaki he called himself?" He gave her a side glance in idle curiosity before nodding his head once. His hand slipped into his pouch, and he pulled out a single card, pouring a trickle of chakra into it to activate the ink and data stored within it. "There." She held the card with both of her hands, finding them trembling as she read the data. He was about a year or so younger than her, but that really was his name. And, now that she thought about it, didn't that orange jumpsuit have their clan symbol on it? Why was his hair blonde then? Maybe he was half-blooded and the traits of his not Uzumaki parent became dominant? The card listed him an orphan though. Did he lose his parents like she did? She had so many questions, and yet no answers. But that was fine. She could find him in the village now that she had felt his chakra. Given how quick he was to talk, he would probably be willing to talk to her about being from the same clan despite being from different villages. "Get ready to move once you get back to the village," Kabuto told her, breaking her line of thought. Figures. The dead members of the hidden grass that Orochimaru replaced were found and word will have been sent. The village will be recalling all their shinobi since none of them made it to the finals. You'll head back to the 17th base once you cross the border, and await further orders. So she was being recalled. It made sense, though it would put a damper on her plans. What about the three I came with? They'll be taken care of along the way. He adjusted his glasses, shifting the glare of light off of them. I have a corpse that'll pass as you as well. 3 dead genin and a jounin in the wake of the chunin exams won't draw too much attention. She wished she could say that the death of her teammates and leader would bother her, but she couldn't. There was no attachment. Not to them or the village. There wouldn't be much of a point when she was there as an infiltrator in the first place. The fact that they were jerks only softened it further. But if she was heading back to the base and faking her death, she wouldn't see that boy again. A possible link to her clan was right in front of her, and if she left it would be gone forever. Karen couldn't just let that slide. She trailed off when he looked her in the eyes. It took a deep breath to muster her courage. Is it possible I can stay in the village for reconnaissance, or another assignment? That's not in the plan, he said, plucking the card from her hands and holding it up to the light. But I'll contact him and see what his opinion is on the matter. My own cover wasn't blown, so who knows what we could do between now and the plan's fruition. That was probably the best response she could hope for as he walked ahead. 0-0-0 Karen was awoken in the middle of the night by the feeling of scales scraping against her bare legs in her room in the inn. She pulled back the covers and found a white snake there, maybe 3 feet in length. The only reason she didn't scream was because her sensory power kicked in the moment she was woken, and picked up traces of Orochimaru's chakra composing it. The snake coiled up and then stuck its head high, flicking its black tongue that contrasted the pale scales. Its eyes found hers, and a voice followed as it opened its mouth. "He has approved your request, child." Karen sat up properly, tucking her bare legs beneath her, and placing her glasses on her face before resting her hands on her knees. "He has?" The snake bobbed its head once. "That Uzumaki boy is the Jinchuriki of this village. He houses within him the nine-tailed fox. It should be said that he has an interest in retrieving him." "Is that right?" She had a basic understanding what a Jinchuriki was. After all, she and Kabuto had been given clear orders to avoid that Gaara boy from Suna like the plague. And she damn well knew why, considering what she felt from him. But Naruto was different. Even though she was still growing adept at using her power, he seemed to teem with yang chakra, vitality and life. He was like a warm sun onto himself, just like her mother was before she died. That meant the seal holding it in must have been superior to the other boys. The snake opened its mouth wider, unhinging its jaw so that a scroll could come out of its mouth. Karen reached over to the nightstand where she had a cloth to clean her glasses, and used it on the scroll before opening it. The snake patiently waited until she had done so before it continued. The boy's status as a Jinchuriki is known amongst the adults of the village. He has been ostracized because of it. He is eager for bonds, the kind that can be exploited by your clans being one in the same. You will use that to get him into a position where he can be claimed during the impending plans. She went over the information on the scroll. It had his grades, close associates, a rough schedule of his activities up to the Chunin exam, a list of pranks he pulled, and more. It had to be Kabuto's doing. That man really did scare her. "But the Jounin told us that we'd be leaving tomorrow," Karen told the snake. "What will be done about that?" "You will convince them to leave you behind while they go ahead," the snake said. "State that you will do reconnaissance into the exams and the finals, to gauge the strengths and weaknesses of the other villages, on your own. Kabuto will supply the information in your place, leaving you to arrange for the Jinchuriki to be taken." So that gave her a month to get to know him and more about their clan. It shouldn't be too hard if what she was reading was right. "I think I can do it by then. Be warned. This will interfere with the immediate plan to take the Uchiha in hopes of obtaining them both at a later date. If you fail, you will be punished severely. Your talents make you valuable, but there are other fates worse than death. He does not wish for this, but an example will be made. Do you understand?" She swallowed, a drop of sweat running down her brow at the very real threat. He could render her brain dead, or lock her up into a vat to be used as a tool rather than a person. Or hand her over to Kabuto, and let him get creative. I understand," she told it. "Then, there is one more matter that needs to be attended to." It uncoiled and slithered around to the sole of her feet. "Cover your mouth now. This will be painful." She barely got her hands over her mouth as the snake lashed out, and bit her in the sole of her left foot, where the heel bone rested just above. Pain unlike anything she'd ever known attacked her. Unholy agony ran through her leg, carving its way up from her heel to her knee. The scream that wanted nothing more than to come out remained muffled by the mattress and sheets as she collapsed with tears in her eyes onto the bed, only able to endure the agony, while the snake impassively watched on as the seal formed of poison, and blood etched itself onto her. Karen had been marked. Karen's leg still felt sore when morning came. The snake had disappeared sometime after she had passed out. Her team had left her behind without much trouble not even an hour ago, heading back to their village. The Jounin had made it clear that she was responsible for her own actions and, if caught, they would claim she was acting of her own accord and leave her to her fate. She already knew that, of course. From this point on, she would have no contact with them or Orochimaru to avoid suspicion on any level. Kabuto would handle the reports being sent to the hidden grass, and would only contact her on his own accord or Orochimaru's orders, meaning she was on her own for all intents and purposes. Now she walked down the streets of the Hidden Leaf, while dressed in a pair of shorts, sandals, and a long-sleeved red shirt. The scroll with all the information compiled on Naruto Uzumaki, which was stored safely away from prying eyes, had stated he often visited a local ramen vendor for his meals. That was where she was heading. It would be the best place to tell him about them being born of the same clan. The people there were the only ones who he had emotional ties to without being shinobi, making it a safe place where he could escape from the cloak and dagger nature of their work. It was a place where the revelation would have the most impact. The smell of ramen broth coming from the opposite end of an alley told her she was close. It also caused a pang of hunger to bubble up in her stomach. She hadn't eaten since last night, and it was well after noon at this point. "Welcome to Ramen Ichiraku," said an older girl in greeting as Karen passed through the entrance. She was at least close to being an adult, dressed in a white apron with a matching bandana in her long, dark brown hair. "What can I get you?" "I'm looking for Naruto," Karen said. "Naruto Uzumaki. Do you know if he'll come in today?" Her eyes seemed to rise in surprise at that, quickly settling into a cautious gaze. "Oh. And why exactly do you want to know that?" "Well, the first reason is that I wanted to thank him for saving me in the second exam." She pulled out her ninja ID, showing her last name. "The second is that I think we're from the same clan." I stared at the card for a moment, scrutinizing it. Then she handed it back and held up a finger. "Give me a second." She went back into the kitchen. Not 10 seconds later, a large man came out, middle-aged with crow's feet around his eyes and gray hair. Lurked behind him as he approached Karen. "So, you're saying you're part of the same clan as the boy?" He stared hard at her, rubbing his chin in thought. "Is that red hair a trait?" "I believe so," she said. "My mother had the same hair color, but I can't say if it's the same for everyone. I'd been looking for other clan members since I became an orphan after bad things happened. I ran into Naruto in the forest, but I didn't get a chance to talk to him with the exams going on." "Well, take a seat and wait for him to show up." Tucci turned to go back into the kitchen. Make the girl something to eat while she does." Did so, setting the steaming hot bowl in front of her. "Here on the house." "Thank you." Knowing Naruto, he'll be here shortly. Leaned onto the counter with her elbows and perched her head in her hands. She wore a friendly smile. "In the meantime, tell me how he saved you." Karen gave her the details, and then answered some questions on what it was like living in the hidden grass. Not as bright as the hidden leaf, but it had its own nocturnal charm with plants that shone in the dark by expelling light in a soft glow. When the spores were scattered, it was a beautiful sight, like it's stardust falling from above. While she did that, she expanded her sensory powers in anticipation. It was slow going, waiting for him to show up. But was kind and talkative, making the time seem to pass quicker. It wasn't until Karen finished a second bowl that she picked up his chakra and turned her head towards the entrance. Naruto popped in with his eyes closed and a big grin on his face. "I smell something good. Serve me up some of that, Tucci-san." "You little charmer." Walked over and pinched his cheek playfully. "Saving damsels in distress and sweeping them off their feet is all in a day's work now, huh?" Karen's cheeks reddened from embarrassment with the way she said that. But it was true, as much as she wished otherwise. He had come in and swept her off her feet to rescue her from danger, almost literally. His voice was almost comical as he tried speaking while she tugged at his cheek. "What are you talking about?" The older girl released him and gestured to Karen, who wiped her mouth with a napkin and cleared her throat. "Hello again, Naruto." He pointed to her in recognition. "Ah, you're that girl from the forest." She nodded once. I'm glad you remember me, and that you made it through the forest safely. Really? He tilted his head in confusion. I mean, you threatened me after I helped you get away from the bear. I'm sorry about that, she said. The bear you saved me from had been sent to attack me by my teammates, in order to lure someone into helping me. I didn't want you to have to fight them, so I drove you away before they could hurt you. It wouldn't have been fair, given you had saved me despite us being from different villages. Okay, but that was a really dumb plan though, Naruto said. She didn't disagree. I mean, you could have really gotten hurt. What if I hadn't helped? Told you, I am said in a sing-song tone, even as he looked pensive at the information. Are you going to stand there all day, Naruto? Naruto? Can I sit next to you and eat while we talk? Naruto asked Karen, scratching his cheek at the awkwardness. That hospital food wasn't doing it for me. Sure. She waited for him to take a seat and place an order. He seemed bothered by the news, a shift in his day he wasn't expecting. It was better to let him start the next dialogue. So he started with, I know that a lot of clan members look the same. I mean, the Hyuga all have the same eyes and Kiba's family has those markings. But we don't look too much alike, do we? I know my mother and father had red hair similar to mine, Karen said. I was surprised you didn't at hearing your name. If you didn't dye it, then I would have to guess one of your parents wasn't an Uzumaki, and their dominant genes gave you blonde hair. I wouldn't know, he said. I never knew my parents. Sorry, she told him, a small, sad smile forming on her face as she looked down. I know what it's like to be an orphan myself. My father was gone before I was born, and my mother died during an attack on the small village we lived in a few years ago. I'm sorry for your loss, Naruto told her. When you told me your last name, I didn't know what to think. Her fingers grew restless and entwined themselves in her hair. It was surprising how easily the words came out. They weren't false or an act, but how she truly felt. I wanted to speak with you, to meet you outside the forest and talk about, well, anything. I thought since the Hidden Leaf and our home village were close, you'd know more. She reached up and traced the embossed spiral symbol of the Hidden Leaf on his headband. Mother told me that the Uzumaki clan had been scattered, at least those that survived. She told me that the spiral, like on your back and your village's emblem, is the symbol of the hidden whirlpool, a sign of how close the villages were before it fell. Naruto looked upset now, staring down into his ramen that reflected his eyes. I didn't even know that much. You must think I really should have, if that was the case. Not at all. Karen kept her voice gentle. While it was true she wished he did know more, that was no reason to have him beat himself up about it. How could I blame someone who wasn't even born during that time for not knowing anything? Besides, you saved me. I can't thank you enough for that. You're welcome? He rubbed the back of his head nervously. Then his face scrunched up before settling into a smile. Now that I think about it, I bet the old man would know more about this stuff. He knows just about everything. Karen opened her mouth to ask who that was, but another voice beat her to it. I'll be sure to ask him that after I tell him about how you disobeyed orders, Naruto. Oh, Naruto said, almost whimpering. Karen could hear him gulp before he turned his head glacially in fear. Kakashi-sensei, what bring you here? Oh well, you know. He set a hand on Naruto's shoulder and gave him a smile expressed through how his eye closed. Imagine, to my surprise, when I came to visit my student in the hospital, and learned he's left through the window of his room, which he was ordered not to leave until he received further notice. He's not in trouble, is he? Karen asked, somewhat worried for a number of reasons. She knew who this man was from the scroll. Even before then, he had reputation and Orochimaru had him on the list of those not to take lightly. Probably nothing more than a scolding and being tied down to his bed, miss. Karen, she said. Karen Uzumaki. She says we're from the same clan, Naruto helpfully added. Ah, interesting, he said, looking at her. But that's a matter for a later time. You'll be here for a while, yes? Until the end of the Chunin exams, Karen admitted, looking at Naruto. She couldn't stop him from being dragged back. I'm staying at the Petal Fall-In. I'll come visit you in the hospital, if you're willing to put me on the visitors list. No need, Kakashi said, before Naruto could get his own words out, lifting the genin out of his seat and onto his shoulder. It was exactly like how Naruto had done her. He'll be released tomorrow, and no doubt here, dining on the delicious ramen they sell. My compliments to both you and your father, Ayam-chan. The older girl blushed. Tea, thanks. Wait, my ramen. Naruto's words were cut off as he and Kakashi vanished in a textbook perfect body flicker. Even as Karen extended her range, she could feel that he was already outside of it. The man was fast. Naruto's a sweet boy, but not really a conversationalist when you catch him off guard, Ayam told her as she took his bowl and packed it into a box. I'll go deliver this to his room at the hospital. Do you want me to tell him anything? Karen bit the inside of her lip as she tried to think of what to say. Tell him I'll see him tomorrow, around the same time? You got it. Ayam gave her a wink and then left out with the box while it was still warm. Karen gave her thanks to the chef and promised to come again before leaving, deep in thought about everything. She didn't expect to find Kakashi in her room when she got back, leaning against a wall near the window. That, honestly, shouldn't have been a surprise. Naruto was too valuable to their village as the Jinchuriki for anything less. You've gone through my things, haven't you? Karen asked. It was the first thing they taught you to do when rooting out spies and finding hidden caches. Of course, Kakashi said without shame. He had no need to hide what he'd done. He lived in this village, she was a guest. No offense, but you are a kunoichi from another village. Even if the hidden grass isn't hostile, precautions should be taken, especially in light of what transpired during the exams. She was fairly sure he meant those dead genin from her village that Orochimaru had replaced. I'm not allowed to talk about that, even if you know. I have no idea what you're referring to, he lied, doing the same. Plausible deniability was a wonderful thing. But, on the matter of Naruto, you understand we're wary about someone with clan ties suddenly appearing after he's slated to head to the finals. Are you here to tell me I can't see him again? Far be it for me to deny him the chance to bond with a long-lost clan member. He stood straight off the wall now. I'm just informing you that you will be watched as a target of interest. If, at any point, you pry into secrets that you shouldn't, you'll be detained as a spy. You know the standard conduct expected when it comes to extended stays in foreign villages, correct? I understand, she told him. I'll be good. He nodded his head once in acceptance. I'll take my leave then. Then he leapt out the window. Her sensory power caught him walking around to the side of the building, into the alley, and then disappearing. It must have been a shadow clone. Karen sighed. She was grateful that the seal on her foot also served as a storage seal for Naruto's information. That would have been execution-worthy. She spent a few minutes looking around to see if he left behind any sort of bug, more out of habit than necessity. It wouldn't be hard for someone experienced to have the room watched without her noticing visually. Her mind's eye was a different story, allowing her to sense the Umbu officer that lurked just outside her room now. And she planned to keep that a secret for that very reason. 0-0-0. The original Kakashi, sitting the Hokage's office, received the information from his clone right about then. The warning has been delivered. No signs of anything in her room to suggest she's a spy. Good, Sarutobi said, tapping his pipe as he stood at the window and looked out at the village. I would have hated to have to tell Naruto that she was a spy after he just learned about his clan. That will already be enough of an unpleasant conversation tomorrow. So, is she a spitfire like Kushina? Asked the third person in the room, Jiraiya. The Toad Sage had been ordered to return the moment they noticed Orochimaru's presence, and he'd done so quickly and dutifully through judicious use of the ability to be reverse summoned. Not at a glance, Kakashi said. Then again, hidden grass shinobi were always hard to read. They're diplomatic in their roots, after all, at least with us. Priorities, gentlemen, Sarutobi said. Orochimaru has gone to ground and I doubt we'll find him. I have nearly the entirety of ANBU searching for him, but in the meantime we need to deal with those seals he placed on Naruto and Sasuke Uchiha. I'll take care of that seal he placed on Naruto the moment I'm out of here, Jiraiya told him. From the sound of it, it was the 5-pronged seal that's messing with his chakra flow. Fixing that won't take 5 minutes, but he'll need a day or so for the flow to readjust. As for the Uchiha boy, the seal Kakashi placed was the best we could do right now. If I had the chance to investigate it through an autopsy, I might be able to do something, but until then he'll have to manage. Next is the Chunin exams. The Hokage turned towards his desk and extinguished the contents of his pipe. Kakashi, you train the Uchiha so he doesn't get killed. You have the Sharingan and can help him. Understood, Kakashi stated. But what of my other 2 students? Miss Haruno can make do by mingling and learning from her peers or her parents. My priority at the moment is the 2 boys that Orochimaru targeted. Speaking of Naruto, Jiraiya, you came in undetected, correct? Jiraiya nodded. Good. Disguise yourself and prepare to train him, I'll leave how to your discretion. As an afterthought, he added, no gathering inspiration either, it's too much of a giveaway to your presence. He sighed, but agreed. Understood. That just leaves me then. He took a deep breath, no doubt feeling his years if Kakashi had to guess. I'll make arrangements to have my schedule cleared for an hour or so to talk to Naruto about his mother and her clan. Let's hope he's ready to hear it. Karen made her way once more to the Ramen Ichiraku, where Naruto should be waiting for her. She was fairly sure that her cover hadn't been blown, otherwise the Umbu stationed outside her room wouldn't have been content to remain there while she slept. Under that assumption, imagine her surprise when she entered the restaurant to find Naruto glaring and grumbling heatedly at an Umbu officer sitting there. It was a woman, with purple hair and a porcelain mask that resembled a cat with 3 stripes. Karen froze in place, wondering if she had been made after all, and they were just waiting to get her here for some reason. It was illogical, given how much quicker and easier snatching her from her room would have been, and she knew it. But knowing how unlikely it was didn't ease her doubts. The fear activated her mind's eye on instinct to find there were a few other signatures around her, one being really strong. Like as strong as Orochimaru, more or less. That was less comforting than she liked. It was only because Naruto greeted her warmly that she didn't run away. Karen-chan, you're here. Her eyes darted between him and the Umbu officer. Naruto, what's going on? He pointed at the woman petulantly. This lady showed up and told me that I had to answer a bunch of questions and stuff before she would let me stay. The Umbu officer paid him no mind and instead turned to Karen. You're not armed, are you? She quickly shook her head. No, I'm a guest in a non-hostile village. I thought it would be inappropriate to walk around armed. In a worst-case scenario, I could simply call for help. The woman seemed to take that for what it was and rose to her feet. Make any abrupt movements and I will take the appropriate action to restrain you, understand? Karen nodded. Yes, ma'am. She did a gesture, some sort of code that was picked up by one of the signatures.
You've been examined.
Even with the walls in the way. One of those Hyuga people in their ranks then? Could they see the seal on her foot? No, she figured. Orochimaru was many things, but careless wasn't one of them from what she knew. It shouldn't have a noticeable chakra signature, or really draw any attention. Not as long as she kept her socks on and didn't try to hide it as anything important, if it came up. A few seconds later, the larger signature moved towards them and spoke when just outside the restaurant booth. Really, was that necessary? Naruto and the Ichiraku staff perked up at the aged voice. They recognized it. Naruto practically beamed with a smile that stretched wide as he called out, "Hey, old man. What's the big idea with the scary masked lady?" The source of the voice stepped in, revealing an old man dressed in the Kage's robe with a hat that held the symbol for the fire shadow on it. Well, she insisted we follow proper procedure with the Chunin exams going on. As if someone would take an interest in an old man like myself? Karen's mind briefly blanked. This was the Hokage. The Hokage was the old man that Naruto was referring to? More importantly, he called his village's most powerful shinobi that to his face. Naruto, you can't just disrespect your village's leader by calling him that. She grabbed his head and lowered it with her own towards the Hokage. I'm sorry for how he addressed you. Please forgive him. For a moment, Karen was afraid that the sudden movement would set off the Umbu officer. However, if anything, the woman tilted her head in amusement at the sight. Had Naruto annoyed her until Karen came in? For the Hokage's part, he laughed softly. While Naruto could use a few lessons in manners, he's fine. I've known him since he was a baby. He's like a grandson to me. She released Naruto, who rubbed the back of his head and pouted. The files said the Hokage kept an eye on him, but she didn't expect it to be to this extent. If they were like family, which was a contrast to what it said about him being an outcast, it would make her mission much harder when the day came. The Hokage looked over to Ayam and Tuchi. Good to see both of you doing well, but can we have some privacy? The matters we're about to discuss are somewhat private and involves their clan. They complied and darted to the back of the shop. Karen felt one of the Umbu move into a position to intercept them should they try and listen in. She doubted they would though, given how he addressed them as though they were familiar too. Should I leave? Karen asked. She was interested. In fact, it was the main reason she made contact with Naruto to begin with. But didn't want to offend the most powerful person in the village. Curiosity was deadly when it came to shinobi. The decision is Naruto's, he said, taking a seat. It has been brought to my attention that you have stirred his interest in learning about your clan, but I am here for Naruto's sake, and some of the information may be private. Letting him have the agency is his right. She didn't even have to ask before Naruto spoke up on his own accord. Yeah, let her listen. If we're from the same clan then she should know whatever it is. Thank you, Karen said earnestly, which got a smile out of him. So be it. The older man then looked down to Naruto and frowned a bit, the wrinkles on his face shifting as he did so. Now, I'll be honest. What I'm going to tell you isn't a happy story, which is why I've put this off for as long as I have. And I will be keeping the identity of your father a secret. He was a shinobi who dealt with high-profile missions, and you know the rules when it comes to A and S rank secrets. Naruto's interest was piqued. He nodded. Don't ask question, don't say anything, basically. I know. But if we can't talk about him, then does that? Karen didn't blame him for trailing off. He had been an orphan and likely hadn't thought much about it. It was easier that way sometimes. She had been fortunate having a mother who could tell her that her father would have loved her unconditionally, but what assurances did he have in a village that ostracized him from what she read? The Hokage pulled out a card and handed it to him. It was a ninja ID card with the identification number being 007310. The picture was that of a beautiful woman with long red hair, with a bandana for the village on her forehead, and a smile was on her face as she held up 2 fingers in a victory pose. Kushina. Uzumaki. Naruto brushed the image gently. So was my mother? She died the night of your birth, the Hokage said, somberly. Along with your father, I'm afraid. There were no other relatives left alive, no other members of the Uzumaki left to take you, and since their village had been destroyed shortly after she was brought to the hidden leaf from the hidden whirlpool, during her childhood. That made you a ward of the village, but I promised her I'd look after you. They both loved you dearly, Naruto. I see, he said, looking rather sad at that. He must have known on some level that was the case, but hearing it spoken probably brought up all sorts of feelings he tried to repress. Karen still felt inclined to put a hand on his shoulder, a means of comfort. There wasn't much she could say, barring the standard condolences. And that wouldn't do him justice given what he'd learned. She knew that she didn't feel any better when others gave them to her when she mentioned her mother's death. Naruto appreciated the gesture all the same, judging by how he looked up to her with a somewhat forced and fragile smile. She has red hair like yours, he told her. Only longer and pretty, like Sakura-chan's before she cut it. Karen felt a pang of something at the mention of his teammate. A copy of their team photo had been in the scroll, attached for reference with a minor outline of Kabuto's understanding of their group dynamic. It had been mentioned Naruto had a crush on her since their time in the academy. She brought her other hand up to her hair, and fiddled with the ends as the murmur slipped out on its own. Give me a few more years and my hair will be long too. He tilted his head. You say something? A small blush appeared on her face at the slip of the tongue. Nothing, Naruto. I just mentioned your mother looks very pretty. The Hokage, watching this with a half-interest, pulled out a map and pointed to a small island between the land of fire and the land of water. Here is where the hidden whirlpool was located. It's quite distant from where we are, a factor that played a part in their destruction during the Great Wars. At some point after your mother arrived, they were attacked by an enemy nation and destroyed. But why? Naruto asked. It looks so small on this map, so why would they destroy it? Seals can do incredible things, Naruto, the Hokage said. They act as contracts that allow for summonings, they can bind souls into one another, and they can make distance irrelevant. Even the basics allow for one to turn script and chakra into explosives, or contain objects in their own pocket dimension. Sealing arts cannot do everything, but, given the clan's proficiency, they had every right to be feared despite being such a small village in themselves. And that was without getting into their other abilities, Karen thought as she rubbed her arms. She had long sleeves on for a reason, so that the bite marks wouldn't draw attention. She didn't feel like explaining that to anyone if she didn't have to. Sadly, he continued, this was actually a common practice during those terrible times. Clans with unique bloodlines or artifacts would give the enemy an advantage. If given a chance, the soundest tactic was to either subsume them or eliminate them. That is often why such clans congregate into the larger villages like those found here, for their own protection. Karen hesitated when she drew their attention by speaking. Have you seen it since then? What's left? He nodded. We were fighting our own battles then, but I did. Like I said, they tore the village down thoroughly. It had been hollowed out, plundered of whatever valuables it had, and remains were everywhere. To see such a long-time ally of our village in such a state was disheartening. We laid all that we could find to rest in a mass grave before returning to our village, only able to keep their memory alive with the spiral within our village's emblem. Even then, time has robbed most of that memory. Karen couldn't help but feel a weight in her heart, tears slowly forming at the news. She was no different than Naruto when it came to his mother. She knew logically that it had happened, and should have been prepared, but it still hurt listening to it from someone who had been there. This time Naruto laid a hand on her shoulder, offering her some comfort in the same manner she had done him. It surprised her at first. Not many people had touched her soothingly after her mother's death. She touched his hand, wrapping her fingers around it and squeezing softly. The Hokage allowed it, a moment of silence until she calmed herself. This is why I was waiting until you were older, Naruto. I didn't want to tell you that you belonged to a clan that had been robbed of everything. There is no land to give you, no legacy, but what is in history books, nothing but ruins of your scattered clan. So it was just luck that I ran into Karen-chan then? To be frank, I was surprised when I heard that Miss Uzumaki here contacted you, he said. Karen figured that meant he didn't personally oversee all of the applicants for the Chunin exams then. Some mid-level paper pusher was responsible, if not a group of them given the sheer number. Besides your mother, the last time I received a report about a suspected full-blooded Uzumaki had been during Hanzo's reign in the Hidden Rain, and he had been killed by the man himself from what my student told me. Even if there were others, it was likely they were sold on the black market and lost to the world, Karen added. They both looked at her. It almost happened to me. After the village I was raised in had been raised by bandits, and I went to another. 2 slavers recognized my hair and planned on selling me. I managed to get away somehow and joined grass sometime afterwards. You were fortunate. The Hokage looked to a clock on the wall, and then to Naruto. My time is growing short, I'm afraid. I'll have to leave soon. But, before I do, what were you planning to do for the finals, Naruto? Oh that. Naruto crossed his arms and scrunched up his face in thought. I was just going to punch that Niji guy in the face until he stopped moving. Why? Karen gave him a doubtful look. Aren't Hyuga supposed to be really good at close combat? I don't know the specifics, but they do something to your chakra if they so much as touch you. I saw what he did to Hinata-chan in the preliminary, Naruto said. But I swore on her blood that I would get revenge. I won't back down. I'll ask Kakashi-sensei for training. I'm afraid he'll likely be busy training your teammate, the Hokage said, rising to his feet. He's the only one left who can help him with his eyes. However, I've arranged for you to have a personal tutor named Gamma. He'll contact you soon for training, so don't skip his lessons. The thought of receiving a personal trainer seemed to make Naruto grin as brightly as he had when the Hokage first arrived. Thanks, old man. I knew you'd look out for me. Karen rose to her feet and bowed in gratitude. Thank you for telling me all of this as well. It meant a lot to me. The Hokage smiled. Thank Naruto. I'm glad he found you, and I hope you two get along for the duration of your stay in the village. He could use someone else cheering for him in the finals, since I'm supposed to be unbiased. Of course, she told him. I'll be happy to cheer him on. Then, I'll see you both at the finals. Farewell until then. The Hokage departed with that said, the hidden Umbu doing the same as they trailed him back to his tower in absolute stealth. That left them alone until the owner of the Ichiraku and his daughter came back in. The pair, perhaps seeing their faces in light of the new information, set to making them both a bowl of ramen to lighten the mood. You're really going to cheer me on? He asked as a steaming bowl was set in front of him by Ayam, who proceeded to run her hand over his hair like an older sibling would a younger one. Why wouldn't I? Karen asked. I'd be happy to see my fellow clansmen become a chunin. I'll even help you if I can. I'm not much of a fighter, and what I can do is limited, because I'm not a member of your village, but I'm fairly good at chakra control and planning things. At the very least, I can help you study up on strategies and tactics. He seemed happy at that, but there was still a sense of lingering somberness hanging over them as they finished and said their goodbyes to the kind pair that ran Ichiraku. Naruto came to a stop when they reached the end of the block and turned to her. Can we pick up on this tomorrow? There's somewhere I want to go since, if my mom was in the service and died that night. She understood, even if he didn't finish. You want to visit the Memorial Stone, I think they called it here? Naruto nodded. We can meet up at Ichiraku's, same time tomorrow. I should have my head a bit more clear by then. Sure, but first let me do this. Karen took a deep breath and gave him a hug, feeling his body tense in her grasp before relaxing. She pulled away and looked him in the eyes. If you ever want to talk about it, let me know. Okay. 0-0-0. Her name was there. Naruto found it strange he didn't notice it before when Kakashi brought them. He thought he should have been drawn to it through some sort of familial connection, as the son of a fallen kunoichi. But he hadn't noticed until he was told. That ate at him. Then again, part of him hoped he never had to know anyone on the stone once he had learned what it meant. It would mean they were dead, killed in the line of duty. It meant that he had failed to keep them safe as a fellow shinobi. Did that mean he failed her the moment he was born as well, too late to act as the seal to hold the nine-tailed fox before it killed her? Or did she die giving birth to him, and he was the one who killed her? Naruto stirred at the sound of someone approaching behind him, and turned to see Kakashi there. Didn't expect to see you here, the Jounin said. I take it the Hokage talked to you about your mother's clan? He nodded. Did you know her? Yes, I did, Kakashi admitted as he crouched down next to him by the stone. I was acquainted with her when I was a child around your age. You inherited a lot of her personality, you know? Naruto looked him in the eye. You didn't tell me. Why? There are many secrets surrounding you, Naruto, he pointed out. Both your status as the Jinchuriki of the nine-tailed fox, and the situation leading up to it. I couldn't, even if I wanted to. You understand that? He did know. The only reason he knew as much as he did now was because of a series of coincidences. Mizuki had told him out of spite that he'd been the one to contain the nine-tailed fox, and he was sitting in prison with no chance of getting out if Naruto remembered right. For someone as loyal as Kakashi, he would have kept quiet under torture. Naruto couldn't begrudge him or anyone else for that. I guess you're right. We can talk about her now, if you want? Kakashi offered. Naruto thought about it for a moment. Yeah, I'd like that. So they did.